He slid the divorce papers across the table while our son was still smearing birthday cake across his face. That detail never leaves me. The blue and gold banner hanging crookedly above Benjamin's high chair. The sound of 30 people laughing at something behind us. The smell of vanilla frosting and barbecue smoke mixing in the rented hall's warm air. And Daniel, my husband of 15 years, reaching into the inside pocket of his blazer and placing a pen on top of a neatly stapled stack of documents like he was closing a business deal instead of ending a marriage. I thought it was a joke. For a single terrible second, I genuinely believed he was pulling some kind of dark, miscalculated prank. Then I looked at his face and I knew. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't guilty, he was relieved, the way someone looks when they've finally said the thing they rehearsed alone in the car for weeks. "I think it's time we stop pretending," he said. The words landed soft, almost gentle, which made them worse. People near the bar kept talking, someone laughed at something across the room. My sister was carrying a stack of wrapped gifts toward the back table. His mother was taking photos of Benjamin, and I was standing there looking down at papers that already had my name typed neatly beside the signature lines. Daniel leaned slightly forward, lowered his voice just enough to feel intimate and cruel at the same time. "I'm keeping the house, the company, the Escalade," he paused. "You keep the baby." The silence that replaced all the noise wasn't dramatic. It was just sudden, the way sound disappears underwater. I remember staring at the fluorescent lights above the hall kitchen and listening to them buzz. That buzzing is still the clearest memory I have from that moment. Not his words, not the gasps from people nearby, just that low, indifferent hum of cheap lighting above a rented room where my marriage ended in front of everyone I knew. I should have cried. I wanted to. Some part of me wanted to collapse sideways into emotion, wanted to scream at him, wanted to throw his careful, organized, cruel documents into his face, and ask how a man who once held my hand through a miscarriage waiting room could look at me like I was a line item to be resolved. Instead, I picked up the pen. The entire room had stopped pretending not to watch. Daniel's coworkers were frozen near the drinks table. A woman from his accounting office looked genuinely horrified, her plastic champagne flute halfway to her mouth. I saw Emily starting to move toward me from across the room, and I shook my head once, barely, just enough to stop her. Not yet. My hands were steady, I don't know how. I signed one page, then the next, then the last, and I slid the papers back across the table without a word. Daniel blinked. He had expected something else. A scene, maybe. Tears, definitely. Perhaps begging. He had prepared himself for an argument and received silence, which, after 15 years of marriage, I knew was the one thing that genuinely unnerved him. Daniel could manage conflict. He could deflect emotion. But silence made him feel invisible. And invisibility was the one thing Daniel could not perform his way out of. I held his eyes and said quietly, "You have no idea what you just did." Just that. Face. Then someone across the room started playing music again, God bless whoever made that decision, and the room exhaled and slowly returned to the performance of normalcy. I stood up. I wiped frosting off Benjamin's cheek with my thumb. I lifted him into my arms. Daniel didn't stop me. That hurt more than the papers did. The absolute confidence that I would not take Benjamin and simply leave. That even now he assumed I would orbit around him. I walked out. The late September air was cold in a way that felt like waking up from something. I strapped Benjamin into his car seat while my hands finally started shaking the way they'd been threatening to the whole time. I could barely work the buckle. Emily was behind me before I'd even finished, slightly breathless, her heels clicking fast on the parking lot asphalt. "Claire," she whispered, "what the hell just happened?" I stared through the windshield at nothing in particular. "I think my marriage just ended," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Then no, I think it ended a long time ago." The terrible thing was that she was right. I knew it the second she said it. The way you know a thing you've been carefully not knowing for years. Daniel and I met when we were 26, before Greystone Custom Homes existed, before the custom suits and the golf tournaments and the Escalade and the magazine profiles and the endless revolving door of ambition that eventually replaced everything else in his life. Back then, he was a carpenter with rough hands and genuine dreams. We used to sit on the kitchen floor of our first apartment eating cheap takeout because the table was buried under invoices, and I loved him so completely it frightened me sometimes. We built everything together. While Daniel managed crews and cultivated relationships with contractors, I handled the numbers. I taught myself payroll software at 2 in the morning. I balanced the company's books during my lunch breaks at the hospital where I worked 12-hour nursing shifts to keep us afloat in the early years. I drove his mother to chemotherapy appointments for 4 months straight, while Daniel was expanding into a second market, telling myself that marriage meant showing up for the people who needed you even when it cost you something. I never realized I'd be the only one keeping that definition. The changes didn't arrive all at once. They never do. First it was the suits, then the business dinners that ran past midnight, then the way he started talking about the company like it was something he had built in isolation, like a man who willed an empire from nothing. Conveniently located 1,000 miles from every spreadsheet I'd ever stayed up until 3 a.m. to correct. Self-made. That word appeared in a local magazine profile when Benjamin was 8 months old, and I read it twice, standing at the kitchen counter in a bathrobe, and laughed in a way that had nothing funny in it. Then came Melissa, 28 years old. Marketing. Perfect composure, the kind that comes from knowing exactly how to be noticed without appearing to try. Daniel introduced her at a company event I attended purely out of obligation, and he used her title rather than her name, the way people do when they're trying to establish distance that doesn't actually exist. I watched the way he looked at her when he thought the room wasn't paying attention. I recognized the expression immediately, not love. Something more selfish than love, escape. The warm, uncomplicated relief of being around someone who didn't know who you used to be. I said nothing. What was there to say that wouldn't sound exactly like what it was? By Benjamin's first birthday, our marriage had the texture of something held together by routine alone. We occupied the same house the way furniture occupies a room, present, functional, immovable, and never truly together. I had stopped expecting intimacy. I had stopped expecting partnership. I had settled without even realizing the moment of settling for a life that looked functional from the outside and felt hollow from the inside. Still, even knowing all of that, I never imagined the birthday party. That night, after driving to my father's house in a fog I barely remember, after putting Benjamin down in his travel crib and sitting beside him in the dark until his breathing steadied into sleep, I reached into my purse. There was a thin manila folder inside. I had brought it to the party out of caution, the way a person packs an umbrella when the sky looks uncertain. I had not expected to need it. I had hoped not to. I sat in the dark and looked at the papers inside. Original incorporation documents. Ownership agreements going back 15 years. Signature pages and percentage distributions and capital investment records that told a very different story than the one Daniel had been telling himself for the past decade. My father had given us the startup money, his inheritance from my grandmother, transferred quietly and without ceremony because that was how my father gave things. Without wanting credit, without expecting return. Daniel had always called it our startup cushion. The way people refer to things they don't fully want to examine. He never examined it. He never needed to, because he trusted that I would always be there to manage the details while he managed the vision. Some trusts are betrayals waiting to be discovered. "Oh, Daniel," I whispered to the dark room, "you really should have read what you signed." The morning after felt like stepping into a life that fit wrong, like wearing someone else's coat. I woke on the pull-out couch at my father's house with a stiff neck and Benjamin making soft morning sounds in his travel crib nearby. The silence was enormous. No Daniel. No notifications telling me what the day required of me. Just stillness and the particular loneliness of a life that has just been rearranged without your consent. Emily arrived by mid-morning with coffee and groceries like she was preparing a field hospital. "You need to eat," she said, which is what people say when they don't know what else to offer. "I'm fine," I said, which is what people say when they are not fine but do not want to perform their not fineness for an audience. I opened my laptop instead. There was a focus inside me that I recognized from years of hospital shifts, that narrow, clean, purposeful attention that arrives when emotion becomes a luxury you can't afford. I logged into the Greystone company system. My credentials still worked. Daniel had never thought to revoke them, which was, in itself, the clearest possible summary of how little he had ever thought about what I actually did. I moved through the files slowly. Payroll history, vendor contracts, tax filings going back a decade, loan documents, and then the original incorporation agreement, sitting in a folder with a file name I had chosen and a structure I had arranged, because I had always been the one who arranged things. I read it twice. Then I called Mr. Harlan. Our family attorney was a quiet, methodical man who read every document twice before he said anything and charged less than he should have because he'd known my parents for 30 years. He picked up on the second ring. "I heard what happened," he said immediately. "Small towns have no interest in protecting your privacy. I need to know where I stand," I said. There was a pause that felt like him organizing his thoughts rather than hesitating. "You stand in a considerably stronger position than your husband currently understands," he said. That was the first moment something inside me shifted. Not triumph, not anger, just clarity. The way a fog lifts and reveals that the landscape was never what you thought it was. He explained it carefully. The company's ownership was not based on who held the title of CEO, or who shook hands with contractors, or whose face appeared in magazine profiles. It was based on equity distribution, which was based on the original capital investment agreement, which had been signed before Daniel's name was on a single company document, and which had never been renegotiated, reassigned, or dissolved. Because Daniel had never asked. Because Daniel had assumed that time and authority had naturally transferred ownership in his direction, the way water finds its level. He was wrong. He declared in front of 30 witnesses that he was keeping a company, Mr. Harlan said carefully, that he does not, in fact, own outright. I let that settle. "I'm not interested in destroying him," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's precisely what makes this so difficult for him." The unraveling of Daniel's certainty was not dramatic. It didn't happen in a single confrontation or a climactic courtroom scene. It happened the way most real collapses happen. Slowly, in increments, through the accumulation of small failures that eventually become impossible to dismiss. Suppliers stopped releasing materials on credit. Clients began requesting meetings that turned into exits. The board, which had long operated on the assumption that Daniel's confidence was a reliable substitute for structural clarity, requested a formal financial review. Daniel agreed immediately, which was his second serious mistake. The first had been assuming I would fight him emotionally. The third was assuming my silence was the same as surrender. He came to my father's house 11 days after the birthday party. He didn't knock loudly. He didn't come with anger. He came with the posture of a man who had recently discovered that the floor beneath him was not where he thought it was. "I didn't know," he said when I opened the door. "Not hello. Not I'm sorry. Just that—" "You didn't know what?" I asked. "That I didn't own everything." I held the door without moving. "You never asked." Something hardened briefly in his jaw. "I trusted you." I looked at him for a long moment. "I trusted you too," I said. "That's why what happened at Benjamin's party hurt as much as it did." He didn't have an answer for that. From inside the house I could hear Benjamin waking from his nap, making the small exploratory sounds he made when he was orienting himself back into the world. Life continuing, insisting on itself. Daniel looked past me toward the sound, then back at me. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, and the strange unwelcome truth was that I believed him. Not the whole of him, not the action, not the calculation, not the pen pulled from the jacket pocket at a child's birthday party. But that specific sentence, I believed. He had not meant to hurt me. He had simply stopped considering whether I could be hurt at all. "You didn't just hurt me," I said quietly. "You erased me in front of people who watched me build everything beside you. That one stayed in the air between us longer than the others." "What happens now?" he finally asked. I looked at him without anger, without satisfaction, with something closer to exhaustion wearing the disguise of calm. "Now," I said, "you learn what it feels like to rebuild something you thought you already owned." He had no answer for that either. The months that followed were ordinary in the way that painful things often become ordinary, when there is no choice but to continue moving through them. Daniel moved into a modest rental apartment across town. He stopped wearing the expensive suits. He started answering his own emails again, managing his own schedule, sitting in meetings where he was not the most powerful person in the room, and learning how to listen to people who were telling him things he did not want to hear. The company stabilized, slowly. Old employees returned with cautious optimism. Contracts were renegotiated on terms that were sustainable rather than impressive. I remained involved, but differently. Not as the invisible architecture behind someone else's ambition, but as a named, documented participant in decisions that required honest accounting. It was not the empire Daniel had once envisioned. It was something smaller and more honest, and, in the particular way that honest things can be, more solid. We learned to talk to each other again. First about Benjamin, logistics, appointments, the specific coordination that shared parenting requires. Then gradually about other things, small things, cautious things, the way people talk when they're negotiating a new language after the old one broke. One afternoon in early spring, nearly a year after everything had happened, Daniel came to pick Benjamin up for the weekend. It was an ordinary exchange at the door, coats in a bag, a reminder about a doctor's appointment on Tuesday. But before he left, he paused on the porch with Benjamin on his hip and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in a very long time. "I think about what you said," he told me, "at the party, that I had no idea what I had just done." I waited. "I understand it now," he said. I didn't answer immediately because understanding is not the same as repair, and I had spent enough of my life mistaking one for the other. But I nodded once, and that was enough for the moment. Benjamin turned 2 that spring. We held a small gathering in my father's backyard. No rented hall, no coworkers crowding a bar with plastic flutes, no performances of success, just family. A few people who had stayed through everything without choosing sides. A balloon that Benjamin chased across the grass until he collapsed, laughing into the clover. Daniel stood a few feet from me, watching him. We didn't speak for a while. Then he said quietly, without preamble, "I used to think success meant control." I looked at him. "And now?" He watched Benjamin fall and get up and run again. "Now I think it means not losing the people who would have stayed if you'd been paying attention." That sat between us like something true. Later, after everyone had left and the yard was quiet and the last of the evening light was going orange behind the trees, Daniel helped me carry the folding chairs back inside. Simple, ordinary, wordless. The kind of thing we used to do without thinking. At the back door he stopped. "I'm not asking for what we had back," he said. "I know," I said. "I just don't want to lose what we still have left." I thought about that for a moment. About the years, the papers, the buzzing fluorescent lights, the pen he'd placed so carefully on the table. About the folder I'd kept, about the silence I'd chosen, about every version of both of us that had led us here. "We don't get to rewrite it," I said. "I know, but we can decide what kind of parents we're going to be from here." Something softened in his face, not dramatically, just the slight release of a tension that had been there so long it had started to look like a feature. "Then I want to do that right," he said, and I believed him. Not because everything was resolved and not because the past had been rearranged into something easier to hold, but because he was no longer pretending. And neither was I, and sometimes that's the only honest place left to start from. The sun finished setting behind the trees. Benjamin was asleep inside. The yard was still, and I stood on the porch for a while longer, in the quiet that follows things that have finally stopped pretending to be something they're not. Some things don't end the way you expect them to. Not with finality, not with justice, not with anyone arriving to tell you that you were right all along. Sometimes they end slowly, in backyards, in ordinary light, with 2 people who hurt each other badly enough to finally learn something true. And sometimes what saves you isn't winning. It's knowing what you were holding all along, and choosing, every day, to protect it.